So governance plays a very important part in the whole change management exercise, right? So the structure that was discussed earlier plays that role here. And they follow 5 C principles as part of the 3M model, all right? Those 5 principles, which comprise of C's, of course, again the acronym here, the course of action, critical path to risk management, communication principles, culture principles, and create in form of a manifesto. All right, what does each of these mean? The course of action is the clear goal, right? The objective that you set forth as part of the planning is done and is the key role of the chief change officer, if you will. All right, so that's the first one. So course of action, that has to be clearly laid out and then spread out. That means the whole vision should be very clear for down the line, that even to the last most band in the organization. If that is clear, then everybody's resistance at least comes to a 50%, and has to get repeatedly communicated. Okay, so with that given, if that is gone through very well with the virtue of using various principles of communication and so on and so forth, then you come to a point of critical part for risk management, right? Here things like resistance or the overshoot of budget or the time criticality going away, those risk and risk mitigation activities are taken place, right? Again, this is done by the planning team collectively to ensure wherever they see such kind of risks, there is also a mitigation mechanism. Now, if you go through the details further, there is a matrix which is formed because of the risk management activity, where there's a matrix suggests where the risk can come from, and based on that you put a metric which is measurable, and then you put those levers into play to ensure that both of them match up during the risk elements that come to existence. Okay, and then you start mitigating one after the other. So that's an important, because the change exercise is full of risks, right? You don't know what can derail it. So you put enough buffers for that, but you also put a matrix so that you use that in the right fashion. Okay. Now I mentioned about all these things, right, have to get communicated to smoothen the risk is to a minimum by communicating. Okay, that's one of the key principles within the 5C. So of course there are parameters to this also, right? The communication should follow certain principles including efficiency, comprehensive, transparency. It should be simple, thoughtful, consistent, defined in a defined timeline, and feedback is effectiveness. Now besides this has to go, some communications depending on the OPINE, if you remember, right? The implementation that we do based on the structure of the organization, it requires different level of communication at different bands, mind you, okay? Because that is perceived very differently, and the resistance at different levels is very different. So communication and the people who manage the communication are more at task than anybody else besides even the risk guys, mind you, because they can either increase the risk so much, or by using effective communication through the right kind of MARCOM and other activities, they minimalize it to and get self kind of mitigated through, right? So that is communication, right? And we've seen throughout RISE that communication plays an important role. So the whole copywriting activities, what emails you send out, what messages, all the transparency and simplicity, etc., with the right kind of ambience, right, in terms of putting the right graphics and so on and so forth, they play a very important role, right, along with transparency here. Now besides this, the cultural principle, right, so every organization has a culture, right? So based on that culture, you have to put your communication and your course of action so that that culture is not hampered while making the change, right? But so what one could see is that while you're making a large transformation, by you changing human behavior, changing people to adopt new systems, etc., you tend to change the culture, right? Now, from a senior most perspective in the organization, that is CEOs, not the CCO, right? Not the the chief change officer, but the CEO, etc., would like to see the maintenance of the culture because that has been working for them. Okay. But the risk here is that cultures might change because of the behavioral pattern, resistance coming into play, and the adoption of new systems, right? So I don't know, with time can be laziness, but inactiveness because of new systems, or not completely using it, or whatever that is, right? So culture plays an important role. So then whoever plans, right, the planning committee typically takes the culture into a lot of cognizance to put the planning in a fashion where the execution also maintains the nuances of the cultural aspect of things. So this plays a very important role in the larger transformation. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind when you're discussing these things while the principles are maintained, or even if you're a practitioner. Now, besides that, the creed in form of a manifesto. So since the behavioral have to be maintained, the behavioral aspects have to be maintained, the culture has to be maintained, you need to put certain sort of mannerism, or the, as we call the creed, in form of a manifesto in front of, and has to get blared out, right? It has to get with the vision of transformation and the manifesto, these two things has to get communicated so often and frequently, so that it goes as part of the conscious, as a conscious or subconscious system of each individual out there, so that they know exactly what is happening, why it is happening, and so the behavioral pattern remains the same. And because of that, half the battle is won, the resistance comes down, and the risk factor is also taken care of largely because of that activity. So communication plays an important role with the creed and the cultural aspects, along with a clear vision given in terms of meeting the objective of the change, right? So these principles govern the larger implementation of any large change management, or small changes also, mind you, creates an impact, right? Because a small change becoming a risk factor creates a lot of nuances for the others, right? So that this plays a very important role in terms of governing it through, okay? And it's within the spirit lines or the strategy lines of what is being created through, right? Now these 5 C principles also carry certain parameters which has to be maintained as a clear vertical and horizontal. So the first one being the objective definition, right? This is the course of action, right? Objective definition has to be very clear, so the vision is very clear, so the goal is very clear for everybody out there, hence it has been communicated. The structure which is going to implement this, so people should know who's putting the structure in place very clearly with the names and the objectives, the KRAs and the the KPIs they are looking for, so that they, when they meet up with them and then they're forcing action through, they know where it's coming from. Then the roles and responsibilities, right? We discussed this in the earlier one. So if they are clear on the KRA, they're clear on the KPI, they know what is the objective, they can see what the outcome is coming from, and they push in the similar synergist they push in the direction being one synergy of sorts, so that the outcome is met with. So then the SOPs and the workflows, right? The SOPs and the workflows are done during the planning stage itself, okay? But it is kind of commented through, on a regular basis, so that once, if there is a new workflow, people will know what is coming their way and why they should be doing it, okay? Same for the SOPs, okay? Similar systems goes out for that purpose. So if people are clear on the role, they're clear on the objectives, they know what is the workflow coming into play and what is the larger objective they're coming to meet up at, then it all flows very smoothly unless somebody breaks the chain. So we discussed the critical path, right? The risk management metrics is because of that, and I mentioned that earlier. Same for communication framework, which consists of so many other elements, and that should be defined with the real objectives. So parameters are met with, and so the cultural definition, right? So these are key parameters carried out at every objective level of the 5C principles, and if that is met, it should be a smooth change management transformation. Doesn't happen in the real world. Somewhere or there, somebody drops the ball because of the human nature. But if you start putting these systems in place, you're bound to manage it much more smoother than otherwise. Okay. With that, I will now see you in the key principles of change in the next one. And before that, I will want you to see a system in operation, which you will use for a case study. So next one will be interesting. Let's meet you there.